Hey Vinyl community, this is Tim with the University of Vinyl, back today with another Mastering Engineer video. This one is going to be the 11th in this series that I'm doing. We're going to focus on someone who kind of bridged the gap from analog tape to digital recording. In my first two Mastering Engineer videos that I put out a couple months ago now, I had a kind of a potpourri of different mastering engineers that I featured. And this particular engineer was featured for a couple different titles, but I wanted to make a point today. I've got 5 albums that were mastered by him, and I have not spoken about these extensively in any of the previous videos. So something to look forward to. Today we're going to be featuring Stephen Marcussen. So Stephen Marcussen got his start in 1976. He started work at the age of 19 as a janitor at producer Richard Perry's studio known as Studio 55. And I think he was making $100 a week at that point in time, and very, very gradually basically worked his way up from bottom to the top. While working at Studio 55, Stephen Marcussen actually had a bit of a side project going in a back room with another mastering engineer named Arnie Acosta. And what came from their experiments basically became a new company called Precision Lacquer, later known as Precision Mastering. And Stephen he was one of the first lead mastering engineers for Precision Lacquer. That company, he worked for them from 1979 to 1999 before leaving to start his own company, Marcussen Mastering, in the year 2000. In 1979, Stevie Wonder had put himself under a little bit of pressure because he was working on a new group of songs for a new album that would eventually become Hotter Than July. He wanted to kind of make a statement that Stevie was back with another great album. He had taken a bit of a left-hand turn with that Secret Life of Plants album and was looking for basically a return to form. And his album was mixed down and ready for mastering. It was initially mastered by a guy by the name of Jeff Sanders, and Stevie Wonder was not happy with the sound of the album. He had heard about Arnie Acosta and Stephen Marcussen and what they were doing over at Precision Lacquer, and had decided to give them a shot. So Stephen Marcussen has said in interviews that they worked on creating reference master pressings of Hotter Than July over a period of months, sending them back and forth to Stevie Wonder for his approval. Finally, it was determined that Wonder was going to use the Stephen Marcussen and Arnie Acosta mastered version of Hotter Than July for the album. It's pretty interesting because if you actually look at the credits on the artwork, that is a very cool cover, by the way, and then we've got kind of the flames rising out of the piano on the back cover. But within this gatefold, you will find credits crediting Jeff Sanders with the actual mastering of the album. What happened was, and this happens, it has happened in the past, artwork, covers, pre-production work. We've all heard about especially in these times lately, the delay in getting vinyl pressed, but also the delay with Stoughton, as an example, on getting albums pressed. Anyway, at this point in time, they had the artwork, they had the covers ready to roll, and they had already been printed. But in that time period, Wonder had decided to ditch the Jeff Sanders mastered copy and went with the Marcussen Arnie Acosta version. So you won't find Precision Lacquer credited in the artwork, but you will find Precision credited in the dead wax. And this album sounds absolutely amazing. It is, you know, that cliche, it's a return to form for Stevie Wonder. I particularly like Master Blaster on side 2. It's got a little bit of that reggae tint to it, but an incredible groove on that song. What else do I like? Happy Birthday, kind of a famous story. This whole album is dedicated to Martin Luther King. Happy Birthday was Stevie's attempt to try and raise awareness for trying to get Martin Luther King's birthday recognized as a federal holiday. It eventually did happen, as we all know. Very funny track on side 1. I Ain't Gonna Stand For It. Stevie has got a very famous pedal steel virtuoso, Hank DeVito, on that track. Stevie has taken on a southern twang in his voice. It almost reaches the level of parody, but it's a fantastic song. Something unique to Stevie's albums that you need to hear if you haven't heard it lately. All I Do is got Michael Jackson on backing vocals. Really nicely produced song. This is definitely a return to form. Sounds amazing. Mastered by Stephen Marcussen and Arnie Acosta, his mentor at that time. Precision Lacquering. After releasing Long After Dark in 1982, Tom Petty had some serious thinking, and he was becoming bored with just the kind of regular churn and burn of recording sessions. All of the Petty and the Heartbreaker albums were good to great, and there were standout tracks on every album. But if you look at that run of albums up to Long After Dark, none of them kind of made a cohesive statement, or I will say Damn the Torpedoes, just because of the greatness of the selection of songs. That is a verifiable classic. But in 1983-84, Tom Petty wanted to kind of change directions. He wanted to put out his own Sgt. Pepper's or Pet Sounds. He wanted to put out an album that would last the test of time and would become a cohesive album for him and the Heartbreakers. A signature album that would be looked on forever as an out-and-out classic. During this time period, Robbie Robertson of the band was working with Martin Scorsese, and he was in charge of the soundtrack for The King of Comedy, that famous film, kind of a dark comedy starring Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis. Outstanding movie. Anyway, so Robertson reached out to Tom Petty because he was putting together the soundtrack. He needed another song, and asked Petty if he had anything, in the vault. And Petty gave him a song called The Best of Everything. It was originally recorded during the Hard Promises sessions, all the way back in 1981, I believe. So Robbie Robertson went to work on that song, and he eventually added Richard Manuel on a beautiful backing vocal. He brought in Garth Hudson from the band to add some keyboards to it. I think there is some strings on there that Robbie had commissioned. And the long and short of it was, the song couldn't be included on the King of Comedy soundtrack due to Petty's contractual situation. So it went back to Tom. And Tom listened to what Robbie Robertson had done on that, And it kind of opened his eyes as far as, the added elements that were on that song that had previously not really been on any Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers songs. The strings, the horns, etc. And Petty had an idea to put out a double album, which eventually became Southern Accents, although it didn't turn out to be a double album. At one point in time, Petty and the Heartbreakers were considering 26 different songs to be included on this future double album. So using the best of everything as kind of a motivational piece, Petty took that song and started working on this concept of Southern accents. Petty was from Florida, so were all of the Heartbreakers, and they wanted to kind of map out some kind of a concept about being from the South. The first song that they worked on was going to be the opening track on side one, and that is a fantastic song called Rebels. It took Petty and the Heartbreakers about a year to come up with the final version of Rebels that they could live with. There is a long, long story about the song out there on the internet, and basically the story goes is that they were never able to equal the urgency and the feel of the demo. Supposedly, Petty's demo vocal is the final vocal on Rebels, but that's been disputed as well. However, in taking a year to kind of finally come up with the final version of that song that is on the album, there was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of white powder in the studio during this whole time period that definitely impacted things. Petty and Benmont Tench have admitted as much in interviews. And Rebels is the song that basically caused Petty, in frustration one late evening, to smash his left hand against the wall, break it in several different places, had to have pins inserted, etc., and took him a very, very long time to figure out how to play guitar again. So that all happened for the first track that was purposely recorded for Southern accents. Things didn't get off on the right foot, let's put it that way. The next thing that happened during the recording of Southern Accents is Tom Petty hooked up with Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics. Dave Stewart was in town working with Jimmy Iovine and Stevie Nicks on a future Stevie Nicks album. And Stewart had worked up a song called Don't Come Around Here No More. The title had actually been coined by Stevie Nicks, who was breaking up with Joe Walsh and apparently had told Joe Walsh, don't come around here no more. Joe Walsh had showed up like a puppy dog at the studio trying to talk to Stevie, and the relationship was turning south. Stevie couldn't quite get Don't Come Around Here No More to work out in her favor, and Jimmy Iovine and Dave Stewart called up Petty, and they started working up the song, and Petty and Dave Stewart hit it off like gangbusters, and suddenly Petty's Southern Gothic concept for the album kind of got sidetracked, and we suddenly had some white funk, soul and R&B, horns and synths, computerized drums coming in from Dave Stewart. And this is kind of known as, well, first of all, Don't Come Around Here No More turned out fantastic. It is basically the number one single that was on that album. It's what most people remember that album for. However, Dave Stewart also brought in a couple clunkers. It Ain't Nothing to Me and Make It Better, Forget About Me. Two synth-heavy, drum-tracked songs. Stan Lynch was pissed because he couldn't play natural drums on either of those songs. and they did not fit in with this whole Southern concept. The Southern concept had been worked up. Actually, there was a very good beginning to that album with several songs, like Spike, Dogs on the Run, Rebels, of course the title track, Southern Accents, and The Best of Everything. So what we ended up with was an album that had 9 songs on it. It was a mishmash of production values. You had Mike Campbell and Tom Petty and Jimmy Iovine on the same page on many of these songs. Then we had the other mix of Dave Stewart and Tom Petty kind of going crazy with their ideas. And then finally we had, that grandiose Robbie Robertson, The Best of Everything on the album. So Southern Accents is a flawed album. What I will say though, this album sounds amazing. My favorite track is Buried on Side 2, and it's Dogs on the Run. This is a classic Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers production, composition. There is an incredible snarling Tom Petty vocal on it. There is a stinging lead guitar from Mike Campbell, and then there's kind of an ethereal keyboard organ intro into that song from Benmont Tench. Great drumming by Stan Lynch. Bottom is brought up by Howie Epstein, great bass player, harmony vocals. This is that is a great sounding song. That is one of my favorite Tom Petty songs of all time. Anyway, that is Southern Accents. It sounds amazing. Mastered at Precision Lacquer by Stephen Marcussen. Released in 1985. This is a famous 1865 painting by the artist Winslow Homer called The Veteran in the New Field. And little did they know, but the veteran was actually a Union soldier, and he's in a field of wheat. They should have went with some Confederate veteran in a field of cotton. So even that was a bit of a misstep on the artwork of the cover. In 1985, Dave Stewart was there was a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation going on, because he actually took his band, the Eurythmics, along with Annie Lennox, in a different direction. And he wanted to rely on their next album, which eventually was called Be Yourself Tonight, released in 1985. He wanted to move away from the synth-heavy production for the most part and move toward a soul, American soul, more of an organic-based approach on this album. So unlike what he was doing with Petty and the Heartbreakers, he did a 180-degree turn with Annie Lennox on Be Yourself Tonight. Of course, the most famous song on this album is Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. This is the famous duet with Aretha Franklin, and it also features Benmont Tench on organ, Stan Lynch on drums, and Mike Campbell on lead guitar. Sound familiar? So a little bit of cross-pollination happened during that recording for Southern Accents and Be Yourself Tonight. The lead song on this album kind of announces the change of direction, and that was Would I Lie to You. You've got Benmont Tench on organ, a lot of R&B and soul with the horns and the saxes on that song. Incredible vocal by Annie Lennox. That's followed up by the lush There Must Be an Angel, and this includes special guest Stevie Wonder on harmonica, a really nice tasty solo by Stevie, and this album holds up very, very well. I think it holds up better than Southern Accents, to be honest. I wanted to point out one more song. There is a song on side 1 called I Love You Like a Ball and Chain. And if you listen to that song closely, it's like a cousin to Don't Come Around Here No More. There is the same sitar style synth on that song. There's syncopated computerized drums with a delay effect similar to Don't Come Around Here No More. Just wanted to point it out. If you do listen to that, I'm sure you'll be able to hear what I'm talking about. That's Be Yourself Tonight, released in 1985 by the Eurythmics. You know, the Eurythmics had about another 5 years to go before they went their separate ways. I think they did do a reunion in 99, 2000. Pretty decent album. But there's Dave on the back cover. Like I said, this thing holds up well and it sounds absolutely amazing. Mastered by Stephen Marcussen. Stephen Marcussen was oftentimes credited on the back cover for artwork if the production timeline had their ducks in a row, unlike what I talked about on Hotter Than July. But he was also usually in the dead wax. There would be a script of Precision or Precision Lacquer, and then later on he would actually add an SM for Stephen Marcussen, either before or after Precision. So very easy to tell if you've got a Marcussen mastered copy. In the late 80s, there was a British trio that I have focused on in the past. I've actually done a whole ranking video for all 12 of their studio albums. I'm talking about XTC, of course, and want to talk about the 1989 album that was mastered by Marcussen, Oranges and Lemons. This was the follow-up to what many regard as their masterpiece, Skylarking. And you have to think back to the recording process of Skylarking. Of course, they worked with Todd Rundgren, and Andy Partridge and Todd Rundgren famously butted heads on that album and after that album in interviews. Lots of sniping has occurred in the press between those two. Regardless of that, I think Rundgren on that album elevated the ideas and the instrumentation. It's a fantastic album. Go find the reissue on Ape House if you want the best copy. Back to Oranges and Lemons. So the band were basing themselves in Los Angeles for the duration of the recording of the album. They brought on a new producer named Paul Fox, who had fresh ideas. He was younger. Loved the artwork on the cover. There is Andy, Colin, and Dave Gregory on the back cover. Of course, this is a double album. I think this band benefited greatly. This sound on this album was greatly influenced by Sonic Sunspot. They had this whole alter ego band, psychedelia experiment, 60s pop, called the Dukes of Stratosphere, and they had released Sonic Sunspot in 1985. There are elements of that album and that sound that definitely bleed into Oranges and Lemons. I'm not going to go super deep on Oranges and Lemons because I've really covered it extensively in that other video I mentioned, but I will talk about side one. So side one kicks off with The Garden of Earthly Delights, which is a Revolver-esque foray into deep psychedelia. And at times it's a bit of a chaotic mix, but it's a fantastic song. And it leads into the second track, which is probably one of the most perfect pop songs ever produced, in my opinion, The Mayor of Simpleton, that Andy Partridge composition. Famously, it's got that driving bass line, in the undercarriage of the song that moves that song along. And unlike almost every other XTC song, Colin Moulding did not come up with that bass line. It was actually Andy Partridge who kind of instructed Colin on that bass line. The third song on side one we got to hand it to Colin Moulding, one of his best songs ever, King for a Day, a shimmering pop masterpiece in its own right, with that fantastic backing vocal by Andy Partridge. Great guitar work in that song from Dave Gregory as well, a true band effort. If you want to see a rare live performance by XTC during that time period, look no further than King for a Day on the Letterman Show. You can find it quite easily here on YouTube, and it's a fantastic version. The last song I wanted to mention is actually the closing album on Oranges and Lemons. It's Chalk Hills and Children. It's an Andy Partridge masterpiece. It's an autobiographical song about, he was kind of assessing his life up to that point in time as a pop star, but he is talking about Swindon, the village where he and the band hailed from, and I think there's ideas of fatherhood in that song, being a father, being responsible, but also having this alter ego as a pop star. There is a very, 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 very heavy, very pronounced Beach Boysy, Brian Wilson feel to that song. It is immediately identifiable, but it's a fantastic, beautiful song, Chalk Hills and Children. That's the song that closes out this double album, Oranges and Lemons, released in 1989. Great mastering job by Stephen Marcussen. So when we think of psychedelia, British folk, 1960s pop, there's another person out there, not just XTC, although I think they might have been related, distantly related at one point in time. I'm talking about Robyn Hitchcock, and this is the 1991 Robyn Hitchcock and the Egyptians album called Perspex Island, also produced by that same producer that XTC used for Oranges and Lemons, Paul Fox. And you can hear elements of that kind of big production, although very polished, a lot of sheen on this album as well, similar to that feel that Oranges and Lemons has. There is Hitchcock on the back cover, kind of before he went totally gray, and albeit white now. Robyn Hitchcock, one of the true iconoclasts of pop rock music, and he still is to this day, this current day. Similar to XTC, Robyn Hitchcock has put out some fantastic albums that didn't sell. And although this was a bit of an anomaly for Hitchcock, I think this album did quite well. It helped that he had some star power on this album. He had Peter Buck along for the ride with that chiming guitar, and also Michael Stipe sings backup vocals on one of my favorite songs on the album. The lead-off track on side one has a similar effect to Garden of Earthly Delights back from Oranges and Lemons. The name of this song is Oceanside, and if you listen to this song, it's a very, very churning, it's got a Tomorrow Never Knows Beatlesque feel to it, so psychedelia as well. And this is probably the best Oasis song that you haven't heard yet, although I feel this is a better song than Oasis would have done. The next song is called So You Think You're in Love. That was kind of an indie radio college rock hit in 1991. It's got that chiming Peter Buck guitar that I mentioned. Really nice vocal from Robyn Hitchcock. Also fantastic drumming from Morris Windsor, Hitchcock's former bandmate in the Soft Boys. Track 3 is called Birds and Perspex. This is a perfectly formed British folk, electric folk song. Hitchcock has got a fantastic lead guitar solo on this. Buck is not on that song. And great harmony vocals as well. Side 2, probably my favorite song on the album. She Doesn't Exist. It's a dreamy love song with a really effective Michael Stipe backup vocal. Again, Peter Buck stars on guitar. This is a really, really fine album by Robin Hitchcock and the Egyptians, released in 1991. Perspex Island. If you haven't heard it before, I highly recommend it. And it's got a great mastering job by Stephen Marcussen. That's a wrap on today's video featuring Stephen Marcussen of Precision Lacquer. Worked for Precision Lacquer for 20 years, 1979 to 1999, before going on and working on his own as Marcussen Mastering since 2000. Marcussen, there's a little bit of controversy out there. Marcussen's done a lot of reissue work and a lot of mastering for CD. This brings up issues of the loudness wars and compression, and Marcussen is frequently mentioned as being an offender of both of those issues. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's out there on the internets, and you can read about the debate. But I just wanted to highlight these 5 albums. There are several others from that time period, into, from the early 80s into the late 80s, early 90s, that his fingerprints are all over. Thanks very much for watching today. I will be back soon. I'm going to leave you with some beautiful scenery of the Vail Valley. Enjoy.